Moving on to other news now, President Cyril Ramaphosa says the United Nations Security Council needs to engage more in the escalating conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The Council is expected to convene an urgent meeting later on today, where member states will vote on a resolution calling for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. President Ramaphosa insists that the conflict should be resolved through mediation.
This mediation approach seems to be losing its effectiveness. I mean, we can see now the war that is going on in the Ukraine, and I would say that that conflict is a conflict that should be subjected to mediation, to negotiation, to engagement, because it is not necessary for people to go to war and have people getting killed, infrastructure being damaged as it is now. And it behoves on the countries of the world, particularly the United Nations Security Council. They are the ones who should be getting more and more engaged in a mediation process. And one does not see that happening. One does not see that full engagement. And it is this that I believe should happen to bring the hostilities to an end. That is precisely what needs to be done in that type of situation, because it is not necessary for people to die and to be killed when the option of mediation, when the option of negotiation and engagement is available.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has had major consequences for Germany's foreign policy. The country's historic Russia policy, which has been focused on special relationship diplomacy and economic ties rather than confrontation, has been struck a blow by Russia's escalation. Germany has now come out guns blazing and declared that since Russia started a war, they must now end it. Joining us now is German Ambassador to South Africa, Lesotho and Eswatini, Andreas Peschke. Ambassador, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and a warm welcome to The Full View.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you as well.
I've mentioned in the intro that Germany's foreign policy on Russia has been dealt a major blow as a result of the Russian incursion. What now for Berlin? I mean, what's the next step?
First of all, we have to notice that we are faced with an unprovoked and unjustified military aggression by Russia against Ukraine, a gross violation of international law and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And this is not only undermining European security, but also global security and stability. So I think we have to face up to this situation, and it is now the time also for tough action. That is why when European leaders came together yesterday, they took an unprecedented package of sanctions in order to stop the aggression.
Now, Your Excellency, Germany's efforts to become bedfellows with Russia, I suppose, turned into, what I'd call economic benefit, as Germany benefited from fairly cheap energy over the past 20 years. Now that Russia is incredibly isolated as a result of this incursion, can Germany afford to turn its back from such economic spin-offs?
Well, we have invested a lot of effort into trying to find a political and a diplomatic solution, because you're right, traditionally we have had a strong economic relationship with Russia as well in many areas. And I think we were always interested in peace and stability in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and all over the world. So we invested a lot in finding a diplomatic solution within the Minsk agreements, by visit of our Chancellor, in the Normandy format together with France, Ukraine, and Russia. But now Russia has walked out on all of these formats and started this violent aggression against its neighbor. And here now we are faced with the situation that all the basic principles of our international world order are in danger. If any country can start a war against its neighbor, then no country will be secure anymore. So I think we have to face this situation, and we have to also take tough action, even though the consequences will be severe for all of us.
Now, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said Germany is stunned but definitely not helpless as a result of these ongoing crises. Does this suggest then that Germany will be the latest European nation to impose a raft of sanctions on Russia? And if so, are you at liberty to share with us what those sanctions will be?
There has been a lot of talk and a lot of thinking into what kind of countermeasures could be taken. And yesterday we had an extra meeting, an emergency meeting of the heads of state and government of the European Union in Brussels. And they discussed what kind of measures should be taken now and what demands to Russia must be made. So they demanded from Russia to immediately cease all military actions, and they came up with a very strong package of measures against Russia in this situation. And the sanctions, they cover various sectors. They are unprecedentedly far-reaching, though. They cover the financial sector, they cover the energy and transport sectors, they cover export controls and the access to technology, and they are designed to limit the capacity to wage this war. So I think this is a very tough action. This is a very strong signal. And we feel that Germany, as well as other EU member states and many other countries in the world, stand in a united, strong solidarity with Ukraine in this very tragic and difficult situation.
Your Excellency, I read a very interesting tweet yesterday by Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. Remember that Annegret is the former defense minister in Chancellor Angela Merkel's previous centre-right government, who said, I'm going to quote that tweet verbatim. She said that I'm so angry at ourselves for our historical failure. After Georgia, Crimea and Donbas, we have not prepared anything that would have really deterred Putin. Now, would you admit, Your Excellency, that this has been a massive policy failure on the part of Germany? I mean, did Germany drop the ball on this, ostensibly for not preparing any deterrence and showing any military strength?
Well, I think it's hard to believe for any of us that in the 21st century, so many years after the world war in the last century, a major international power would come up with an aggression of its neighbor. So I think everybody would find that hard to imagine. I think we find it hard to believe, and many other countries and leaders find it hard to believe. So I think we tried very hard in the past to mediate in the conflict. There has been a conflict going on since 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, and then the conflict in eastern Ukraine and the Donbas erupted. So we tried very hard to find a political solution. But now we are faced with a very different kind of situation. Our foreign minister put it that we woke up in a different world. One of the major world powers, a member of the Security Council of the United Nations, a permanent member for that matter, who has a special responsibility for peace and security in the world, chose to aggress its neighbor. So this is a very kind of different type of situation. So we have to live up to this situation now. Nobody could have predicted that Russia would go this far. So now we are in this type of situation, and we have all of us have to live up to the responsibility and take tough action now.
What kind of role then would you suggest that Germany would have played in this impasse?
Well, we try to, as I said, we try to negotiate, we try to mediate, we try to help a political solution. We invested a lot of efforts in trying to find a common ground. We were also ready with our partners to discuss justified concerns by Russia about European security, about armaments control, and so on and so forth. Now, I think Russia walked out on all of these efforts and chose to go the way of conflict, to go the way of armed aggression. So now I think we have to think of these tough measures that we are taking. There are other measures under consideration if the conflict continues. And of course, the road to diplomacy should not be closed, but a condition for this road to be followed again would be the immediate cessation of all hostilities and the withdrawal of troops. Otherwise, it's very difficult to imagine how we could sit at the negotiating table to find a political solution.
All right, Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
That was Ambassador Andreas Peschke, German ambassador to South Africa, Lesotho and Eswatini, just sharing with us Germany's position on the current ongoing impasse in Ukraine.